good, good.
What is the camera? What is the camera or phone propped up on?
It's on inside of shoebox lid.
That works.
Super DIY.
That's the best way to do it, right?
That's how we do it. So you want to talk about horror movies first?
A little bit, yeah, because it's October. It's scary season, you know.
There we go.
So are you not much into horror movies?
Not really, but that being said, I do like horror sci-fi.
Okay.
It's just in the real world. When the horror movie's set in the real world, I have a harder time getting into it. When
And
it's in what?
Why is that? Why do you think that? Where does that come from?
Probably by living in the real world. So,
Well, sure, but I mean, like even quote unquote real world horror movies, like slashers or something like Friday the
yeah,
13th. You know,
yeah,
it's a bunch of campers getting hacked up by a guy wearing a hockey mask. Do you still
yeah.
consider that to be a little too real world for your taste?
Yeah, it's like to get into it, to suspend my belief or suspend disbelief or whatever, and to really get into the horror, like it's an effort, right? Whereas
Okay.
comedy, drama, thriller, sci-fi, those genres, even experimental film works better because I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's some monster dude. Monster movies are good. X Files, I like X Files episodes where it's like some drama, comedy, thriller, all built in. But just
Yeah.
pure horror, I was never a fan. But I like Alien movies. I like the Aliens franchise.
Now, are there any horror movies that you've seen that are more realistically set that you do respond to, or have you just not delved in enough to even have a favorite?
I've watched a few horror movies, but speaking of horror movies, I think the first Terminator I was legitimately frightened by as a kid.
And that's not really, I guess, horror. It's got some horrific elements to it. I guess just the idea of being relentlessly pursued by this thing that won't stop. I
Yeah,
rewatched that earlier this year. It was just a few months ago because it turned 35 years old, which is crazy to me.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, that I don't know if it's, when I was a kid, I thought it was just cool, this whole idea of the future war and this unstoppable cybernetic organism. But now, just as an adult, that strikes more to the real world horror of, what if there's this unstoppable force coming after me?
yeah,
Because you could just imagine walking down the street and someone's following you. It's scary on an entirely different level.
yeah. That I got scared by as a kid. I think I saw it when it first came out on VHS. Um, but other horrors I really haven't gotten into as an adult or even as a kid as a thing that I was into. I think it just kind of looks a little bit silly, and um, but Get Out was good.
Okay.
So I brought up a list of since you were talking about slow horror or art horror, I have a list of 50 elevated horror movies. Ghost Story, I could probably get into that. You saw
And
that?
that's the one from a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah, yeah. From with that director, that indie director,
Um,
David
yes.
Lowery.
Yes. And I'm just struggling because Ghost Story isn't a horror movie. It's
Yeah,
a
it has a ghost in it. I haven't seen it, but it's more like a. Go ahead. It's more like a drama, right?
Yeah, and it's I think it's weird because since we started talking, there's like these little landmines that go off of movies that I never really considered slow cinema until you mention a title. I'm like, holy crap, that's slow cinema. I think you would love Ghost Story. Um,
Yeah,
partially,
I've been. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm saying a lot of the press that came out of that was a lot of people were really jazzed about it. And I'm one of them, partially because the way it challenges audiences with the notion of what will they sit through.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if you've heard about the pie eating scene in that
Yeah, I
film.
saw. I think I saw a shot of it. I think I saw the entire scene. She eats the pie for like 2 minutes, right?
It's more than that. It's like it might be 5 minutes or more of sustained screen time, and it was just delicious, no pun intended. Sitting in
Right.
the theater watching the audience watch that scene.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, so yeah, definitely check out Ghost Story.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely sounds like slow cinema plus horror or art film plus horror. that director, David Lowery, I showed one of his short films long before he was famous, like maybe 10 years ago, in Maryland. And he came down with his buddy, whose name I forget, from Texas, and hung out for a couple of days out there.
That's
And
cool. Yeah, I met him actually at a screening of A Ghost Story here in Chicago, but a couple of years ago now. And yeah, he was a really nice dude. But that's
mhm.
cool. You got to hang with him.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, we used to blog on a blog that I set up, Indie Features '06, back in 2005, 2006. He was on that blog, and also Joe Swanberg was on that blog. He had done his second movie. Uh,
all right.
but yeah, and yeah, David Lowery definitely comes from art indie, that kind of a tradition. So it's not surprising that he made Ghost meets art house movie. I mean, it's an art house movie basically.
Yeah, and now he's doing Disney dragon movies and
Yeah,
films with
yeah,
Robert Redford. It's
right,
crazy
right.
evolution.
Yeah. Well, that's the beautiful thing about the film world. You can make a no budget experimental film. Someone could dig it. They're like, hey, I got money. I know movie stars. Let's make something.
Yeah,
Five 5 years later, you're making Ad Astra.
yeah. So, which I still have not seen. I haven't made time for that.
You should see it.
Yeah, I just don't know when I'm gonna see it. It's probably one of those things, unfortunately, that I'll see at home.
Hmm.
It's award season is coming up, and
No,
they
see it.
send
See it in
screeners
the
and
movie.
stuff.
See it in the movie theater, big screen.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. I can't commit to that.
Right.
But because we've got
Well,
like the.
I'm friends with Brad Pitt, so I'm gonna call him, and he's gonna come out. He's
Oh,
gonna come
really?
out.
Okay.
He'll make. So if Brad Pitt comes through your door and says, "Let's go see the movie," you'll have to go.
Under that specific condition, I think I could be persuaded to change some plans. But
All right.
yeah,
So,
my dance card is full for October. Um, but yeah, so what are some of the other movies on this list of alleged elevated horror films?
sure. I'm not friends with Brad Pitt, by the way. He seems like a nice guy, though.
He
I mean,
does.
entirely possible I'll run into him in New York. I ran into Maggie Gyllenhaal when the Batman movie with her came out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, was it 2009?
2008. Yeah.
Yeah, I ran into her in 2009 in Union Square. I was like, "Oh, you're that lady from that movie." She's like, "That's right." I couldn't think of her name, but I recognized her.
But that's a good out because she
Right.
has been in a movie, so that's correct.
Yeah. She
So
was
what?
just she was just in a fun mood. So
That's cool.
the other titles: Mother,
Mm.
Story, Climax, Suspiria, It Follows, In Fabric, The Reflection, The Perfection, Under the Skin. That would definitely that
Mm.
I think that's beyond elevated. I think that's like, just art house sci-fi. Revenge, Mobius, Kill List. That title's way too small for me to read. The Witch, Antichrist, Starry Eyes, Raw. It's like there's like 50 titles. Get Out is on it.
There's only I think 3 that you listed there that I have not seen, and all of those are, if not great movies, they're great examples of what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to step in, and because some of them are straight up horror movies, and some of them also have
Some
that
of
weird
these I would
science
want
fiction
to.
elements.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely go for it, man. Check them out.
Yeah, Under the Skin I've seen parts of. Antichrist I'd like to see. Get Out I've seen. A Ghost Story I'd like to see. Mother sounds weird. I'd like to see it. It Follows I heard good things about. So it's basically, I mean, like in every other genre, it's just people mixing up art house, indie, foreign stuff, approach plus some horror elements.
Yeah,
Ad Astra is a little bit like that. Not horror, but it's slow cinema meets sci-fi, I could say.
cool. Yeah, there's yeah, I think it's weird because talking about elevated horror when some of that stuff is clearly more sci-fi based. I wonder about folks who put together some of these lists.
Oh yeah, it's silly. It's silly.
Yeah, but so yeah,
Scorsese,
definitely Scorsese. What?
Scorsese will be like, that's not elevated horror.
Yeah. Oh, Scorsese. I'm very curious about the Irishman I know Art saw that last month, right? When it
And
premiered in
for
New
me,
York.
yeah,
Um,
he said
I
he liked it.
he did or he didn't?
He did, yeah.
Okay.
He just said he liked it a lot.
I said, did he say if there was an intermission? Because it's 3.5 hours long.
Yeah, I'm
I
sure.
know movies are getting longer nowadays, but I mean, even that, geez.
Yeah, that's straight out of Lav Diaz School of Slow Cinema. He makes 4-hour movies on the short end, and then he makes 8-hour movies, and maybe even beyond. Maybe he has a 12-hour movie. I'm not sure. But about the Scorsese versus the Marvel movies, not cinema. What do you think about that?
I mean, I can understand where he's coming from, but I can also disagree. And I think part of that, I'm at odds with folks, a lot of my contemporaries on the Marvel movies because the really big popular ones like Avengers Endgame,
Yeah.
I don't really care for. But then there are other movies that, like Captain America Civil War, which is Captain America 3, I thought was really great because it presented a lot of complicated political issues and dealt with them in ways that weren't just, blowing up buildings and just destroying things and setting up for a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I also understand the kind of movies that Scorsese makes and that he's into. So, I mean, I guarantee he hasn't sat down and watched like 5 Marvel movies.
Yeah.
So he's at an arm's length, but he's also Martin Scorsese. So you're not going to be like, shut up, Marty.
Yeah. I mean, he's correct. Those movies are more like uh, theme park rides, but I feel that way about most Hollywood movies to begin with, even some Scorsese movies, because you know, once you have millions of dollars in funding, you have famous actors, wide distribution. You're not gonna you're kind of the thing you have to make. He himself has said that the movies need to make money in an early interview, right? So you can't get too experimental with what you're trying to do. So I think most Hollywood movies are like theme park rides, but obviously the Marvel movies stand out more to someone who hasn't grown up with comics. I don't know if he grew up with the comics that we grew up with, but to me the Marvel movies are just a great extension of the comics, turning them into movies. Right? They've done an amazing job. It's just a genre of their own, and it's not high art. I mean, but it's not. It never claimed to be. It's a comic book movie. Done really well, kind of like Star Wars, but with the comics.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because I would wonder, I, I don't know how to define high art. Like, in your mind, is it possible for a comic book movie to become high art, to become transcendent or something more that would be uh, respected?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about like The Dark Knight, which was up for, you know, like Heath Ledger won the posthumous, I think, supporting actor award for that. And part of me always wonders, is that because he died?
Mm-hmm.
Or would have been recognized, just as a bravura performance regardless.
I
So
think
yeah,
it's possible. I think it's possible for comic book movies or anything to become high art, but it depends on how it's done, what differentiates it from the other more common comic book movies. I mean, just look at something like There Will Be Blood, right?
hmm
I could see that whole situation, you know, done using Marvel characters, and depending on the director who's doing it and how it's done, people might recognize that. I mean, the current Joker movie is being recognized as kind of like an art movie in a sense because of all the production design and stuff, but it's a character from the comics, so it's definitely possible to take that stuff in lots of different directions. I mean, imagine if Jarmusch made a what you call it comic book movie, but he had the final cut and he had to he had the final say on the script. That might be very interesting.
yeah, it could be. And I guess my question would be, in the current paradigm of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe,
Mm-hmm.
could something like Avengers #7 be recognized as high art? If
I
Jim
think so.
Jarmusch, if Jim Jarmusch were handed the Avengers #7,
Yeah.
considering that would probably be like 15 years from now, do you think people would
Right.
be so over comic book movies that they wouldn't be able to appreciate a bold new direction? Or is it just going to get lumped in like, oh god, it's another comic book movie? They're still wearing spandex, that kind of a thing.
I think it could go lots of different ways because um, oh, Birdman was kind of remember the movie
Oh,
Birdman?
I I was
Not
I
the
remember
Birdman,
that
but what
I
was the full
remember
title
that
of that
year.
movie? It
Yeah,
was Birdman plus something else, right?
yeah, it was Birdman. I remember that year because that was the year where it was going up against Boyhood, and
Yeah,
there was this big divide between the Boyhood fans and the Birdman fans. And
yeah.
I was firmly on the side of both, but I thought Birdman was fantastic because it was sort of a comic book movie without being a comic book movie because it was Michael Keaton having played a film version of a comic book character.
Yeah,
I thought it was brilliant.
yeah. I mean, you could take that same conflict he has and do a movie about a comic book hero in the comic book universe no longer wanting to be the comic book hero, and all these other things happen, right? That kind of plot you see in comics and in other movies from time to time. But yeah, like Birdman could be considered a high art comic book movie.
Yeah, I I get what you're saying. I'm wondering like
But most
if
people will still be like, that's a comic book movie.
yeah, it's a weird thing to try and figure out. And we certainly don't have to do it here.
Right, right.
Um,
We don't have to do that at all.
so let's talk about the movie that you're working on.
Okay, well,
Um,
before we
oh,
get to that,
yeah, go
were
ahead.
there some horror movies that you wanted to talk about?
Mm, kind of, but I mean, it's beyond like recommending them. If you
Yeah,
haven't seen them, then it's not like we can't really have a full
sure.
discussion.
Yeah.
But
If
we
you
kind
want
of
to
talked.
recommend some,
Yeah, I mean, like, let me ask you this because I'm trying to like gauge where you're at. Have you seen
yeah,
The Exorcist?
I have not.
You've never seen The
I've not seen,
Exorcist.
no. I've heard about it. It's supposed to be super scary. I'll check it out.
Do me a favor. If and when you watch it, do not watch the director's cut.
Hmm.
AKA, you might see it labeled as the version you've never seen in theaters. I think that's how they marketed it for a big anniversary from like 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, they include a lot of extraneous scenes that are just downright funny and super weird and just completely kills the atmosphere of the whole thing. Um, Interestingly enough, I found out today, and I didn't look up the source on it, but a friend of mine told me about this story that came out on a true crime podcast she listens to, that one of the minor players in The Exorcist, I think it was like a hospital technician for when the little possessed girl goes in to get her head brain scan. That guy was actually a serial killer.
Whoa, that's insane.
And he was actually murdering people. Apparently, like that was within the era of his life that he was in this movie and also killing people.
That was
So
his other hobby,
yeah,
uh, besides acting in movies. I've seen the stairs that are supposed to be in The Exorcist in Georgetown in Washington D.C.
right. Those aren't the same stairs that the Joker dances on in the movie, is it?
No, the Joker stairs must be in New York somewhere or in New Jersey.
Technically, they're in Gotham.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
which is supposed to be in New Jersey. I had to look it up because this will tie into one of the topics in my movie. A discussion came out from Richard Brody's review of the Joker about how race is used in the movie, but not directly addressed. Right? There's like apparently. I mean, I read a detailed description of the movie. I haven't seen it, but there's criminals who are black, and then there's he fantasizes about a black woman as his girlfriend, blah blah blah. And some of the 70s 80s crimes, the true crime stories, had a racial element in the real world in New York. Like this one guy shooting a bunch of people on the subway. I think those kids, some of the people who got shot were black, et cetera, et cetera.
was that
So
Bernie Getz?
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that was
Mm-hmm.
the case. So so I had to look it up because in the comic books prior to this, prior to the new comic books that I haven't read, they don't go into discussing race in the old Batman comics, Batman movies, Batman TV show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as a person who makes movies, we have to determine whether certain elements of the real world are actually in the fictional universe. Some people assume they're all there, but not necessarily, right? So you could create a superhero world or a science fiction world where our modern concept of race doesn't exist. Battlestar Galactica, the remake, is a good example of that. They had multi-ethnic, by our standards, people, right, in
Hmm.
the ship, in their societies, but they never addressed race as something that exists in those societies. So I had to look up where is Gotham City, and apparently it's in real world New Jersey. So, so yes, we can conclude that yes, race does exist, even though it's just not covered in a lot of the Batman material in the Batman movie.
Right, and I mean, you also look at Star Trek. I mean, that was the idea there was there was a multi-ethnic, Starfleet, and not just with human beings, with
Yeah,
aliens and all that other stuff. It was kind of a
yeah.
post-racial
Next
society,
level, next
right?
level. Yeah.
Because I think the idea was, at least, and they explored this in Star Trek: First Contact.
Yes,
Did you ever see that movie?
I did. I saw.
Yeah.
I think I've seen everything Star Trek.
All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like we wiped out most of the planet with nuclear war, and then we kind of came up from the ashes, and then we discovered aliens. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, they're aliens now, so we all have to kind of be on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a beautiful message.
And Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Enterprise, the most recent one of the recent shows. They had a storyline where there were humans, human groups who were against humans and aliens working together. They were trying to create a alien-free Earth, and they were bombing, Starfleet headquarters, blah blah blah. So,
Wow.
so that not everyone was cool with that idea. So ultimately, by the time the Star Trek as we know it, yeah, people are cool with multi species, non-human species interacting with humans, and blah blah blah.
Yeah. Well, I've not watched Discovery. So it's behind that
No,
CBS.
this Enterprise. This was Enterprise.
Oh, is this the Scott Bakula one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I gotta check that out. I think I watched a couple episodes of that, but yeah, like I watched a little bit of Deep Space Nine, but mostly I stopped after like Next Generation and just continued
Mm-hmm.
with the movies.
I
Um,
watched everything. Star Trek is great. Big fan of that show.
yeah.
I mean, it's hokey also. It's badly done sometimes, but still.
Well, it's badly done. I mean, that's kind of I mean, I respect that point of view, but in terms of the hokiness, you go back and you look at the '60s stuff. It's cheesy by today's standards, but it was
Yeah,
earnest. Like the people
yeah.
back then, they were doing the best that they could to make something relevant and serious. It's just now that we've jumped 3,000 years in terms of special effects. We're looking at it like, oh, that's so corny. Look at the walls are moving and that kind of stuff.
That's
Um,
why. That's why I'm shooting my next movie. All real locations. Acting will be, super realistic. And so 3,000 years from now, people can watch it and they won't be able to go, wow, at least the special effects in this movie are good. People seem real.
Well, that's assuming that people will be watching movies 3,000 years from now. I mean, who knows what the what the deal is going to be?
They will be. They will be. I mean, look at I mean, this is just a random guess. Interesting entertainment technology from the past are still interesting to us, like the paintings on the walls of the pyramids, from like 5,000 years ago. We're trying to figure out what they mean. So I think
True.
yeah, 3,000. Yeah, I think it's going to be weird. It's not going to be like uh, us looking back at 5,000 years ago. I think the future will be kind of like a version of our society, because how much more can the entertainment tech without becoming holograms that exist in your in your space, or in your head. That's only like 2 or 3 jumps from where we're looking at something on your screen, right? I think our entertainment will still be looked at. I mean, the stories will be different, right? I'm pretty sure that in 3,000 years, who knows? But in 3,000 years, it may not be as dated as us looking at the pyramid paintings.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about, like, as far as how art will survive, because I mean, with a cave painting, the cave just has to be intact and someone can kind of
Sure.
discover it.
Yeah.
With artwork as it's being done today in terms of film and video production, It's a matter of are people going to have DVD players or the ability to watch what we're producing 3,000 years from now, or it'll be
Yeah.
totally in some kind of a space where you download it from a greater consciousness. I mean, we're already looking at virtual reality goggles and the ultimate extreme. And this is even a conspiracy theory that reality as we experience it right now is a simulation.
It could be. It could
Yeah.
be. I mean, it's not beyond. I mean, I can certainly see the tech possibility of people being able to build something like this. I mean, the most difficult part of the. I mean, you've been sick and you've been to a hospital, I'm sure. Uh, you know, the human body is like a very complex but natural machine. It's just the brain that we can't figure out because we don't know how it works. We don't know the quantum holographic technologies that exist there. But I mean, the human body. We cut ourselves, lose a bunch of blood, we're done. It's not some amazing futuristic technology. It could definitely be replicated. So what I'm saying is, given our current tech, you could create a Truman Show type experience with humans.
Oh, sure. It's funny you mentioned that because the other night I was watching the original Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984,
Nice.
same year as the Terminator.
Yeah.
And there was that is, Wes Craven, when he conceived that movie, he wasn't thinking of Freddy Krueger as being this franchise kind of cackling cartoon character, murderous villain. He was a serious boogeyman. And that film gets into the idea of like the philosophy of dreams and what are they. And there's a great scene in a sleep clinic where the doctor is talking about, we don't really know where dreams come from or what they are. It was a really cool exploration. So that's another one, probably further down the list of movies to check out. But
Yeah.
the original Elm Street.
I think I've seen one of the Elm Street movies. I just never got into. I mean, I guess some people just don't connect with certain genres, right? Like my mom always thought Star Trek type movies were silly. She could never get into it, right? She would make fun of me for watching that nonsense. I think some people just are not going to connect with certain types of movies. But as a filmmaker, for educational purposes, I'll definitely check out some of the horror movies that you mentioned because a lot of people get into it. I might want to use some of those elements in one of my movies.
Yeah, my dad, he liked Star Wars because I was a big Star Wars freak, but I also liked Star Trek a lot. But he hated Star Trek. He always thought it was. I think he described it as a hotel in space.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But I think it also has to do with age and experience. Like I was never into football ever, but recently I've been watching games because it's a good, simple way to zone out from everything else, right? It's very, very basic. Two teams, they got to get the ball to the other side. And a bunch of nonsense happens with the referees and whatever. So it's a good way to tune out.
It's funny. This coming weekend, I'm going down to Champaign-Urbana to watch the Fighting Illini play a football game.
Nice.
Once a year, I go with my father-in-law to a football game, and I've been going with him for like 5 years. We had to skip last year because I got really sick, but we get great seats, and the game is really entertaining, but I have no idea what's going on. And he tries to explain the rules to me, stuff he's explained a million times. I can't hold on to anything. But it is neat watching them go back and forth, and the fact that the game itself takes about 15 minutes, but it's like 3.5 hours to play.
Yeah. No, I think what people, other than crazy sports heads, I think what a lot of regular people like is just like watching a movie, being able to tune out from all your other concerns for a specific period of time, and just focus on the simple conflict.
Yeah, and I don't really speak that language, but sports talk is a lot like movie talk. I'll listen to people in the hallway at my office. They're into like fantasy football leagues, and they're talking about all these stats and crazy stuff. I can't believe this person did that, and I'll walk away thinking it's so stupid. But then I'll get into a 20-minute debate about why the Joker isn't a good movie with someone. I'm like, this is the exact same thing. It's entertainment that I'm not in any way invested in except for having been a ticket-paying audience member.
I will say sports is not cinema.
I've seen some cinematic plays, though.
True, true.
Some straight up
Sports,
Indiana Jones stuff on that field.
yeah, sports can be cinematic, and also I was watching one of the football games, and it would be interesting to do a movie that incorporates the actual video from the actual game, but follow several players from both teams, like a week or so prior, as they get ready for the game, show all the behind the scenes, have the game, and have post, the thrill, because football is kind of an insane sport. All right, these really big dudes are running into each other at top speed. I mean, they're padded, but it's I don't know, as far as the future goes. I don't see how that sport will be still around in like a couple hundred years. I mean, the physical danger of it is so high.
Yeah, I mean, you've already seen all the stories about CTEs and people pulling out of, like parents pulling their kids out of sports and sports programs being in danger. So yeah, I agree. I think it may be around in a few hundred years, but it's going to be the serious, just like hardcore animals, just like
right.
the new warrior class or something
right.
like that. And
like underground games.
yeah, either that or just something that, maybe the events will become so rare that it's not like Sunday afternoon football during a season. It's like, a series of 5 games held once a year.
yeah. With everyone in robotic, armor that, they don't actually physically feel the pain. But I can't imagine anyone. I mean, I heard that the average football career is like 3 years, not counting the 20-year, not counting the quarterbacks who play for like 10, 20 years, like Drew Brees and the guy from the Patriots. But yeah, the damage on the body, I can't imagine, most sane people saying, "Oh yeah, give me a couple of million and I'll almost get killed like every weekend."
Yeah, I mean that's but I mean there are a lot of people who would do anything for a few $1 million, plus the endorsement deals and the fame, and it's a whole trip.
Also, if you grow up playing it, maybe the danger is lessened. Maybe you don't feel like, when I see it and I see these giant people ramming into each other and bones getting not bones. I mean, yeah, sometimes bones do get. And but I guess if you're a player and you've been playing it since high school, college, maybe you don't feel. Maybe you feel like you know what you're doing, and it's not that much of a risk.
Maybe I would almost like watch a sports series about kind of exploring the before, during, and after as you're talking about, because like what does compel someone to do that with their life, especially nowadays when you've got all the knowledge and the science and the stories about these big athletes either going crazy and killing people or just dying slow drooling deaths. It's really sad and weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's get back to areas that we know something about.
I know lots about drooling sad death. No. So yeah, let's talk about Slow Romance. What's going on with this movie?
Yeah, I'm gonna find the. I just had to look up the main thing. So over the last month, I took hundreds of potential scenes, and subjects, condensed them down into 5 major subjects that the people on the dates talk about. The major subjects are romance, love, relationships. That's one subject. Body versus soul, and in a secular sense, the personality as the soul, right? So one of the ideas that I'm into is how we think about other people, right? For our entire history, unless it's someone we know, we form opinions about other people based on their body, right? How they look, ideas we attribute to that, blah blah blah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And almost much of the time, the guesses are wrong. Only rarely is it correct. I mean, or we can't really find out until we get to know the person, right?
Sure.
So one of my theories that theories from making movies and observing actors is that all human personalities are performances. I mean, this is not even my theory. I mean, this is an idea that exists, and some people have really looked into. It's just people who are not actors, we don't realize the choices we make over the years that forms our personality, as opposed to when someone's an actor, they get handed the character, then they have to make choices as to how will that character walk, how will they speak, what kind of language, what kind of how will they present themselves. So my theory is that while the bodies are fixed, I mean, you're stuck with the body that you're born with minus some changes. Uh, Personality could be anything. That in the future there may arise uh, really well-defined ways of drastically changing your personality, where you can become someone else pretty easily, just the way that actors become someone else. So anyway, that I go into, because there's two filmmakers talking, I go into that idea. It's the old body versus the soul um, discussion in philosophy and religion, but now it's body versus the personality. The other one is race. Light, fun conversation about the topic of race.
Yeah, that's there's nothing sticky there at all.
No, it's one of the ways art indie filmmakers can distinguish ourselves from mainstream content is dealing with things that in society that mainstream movies just can't deal with or won't deal with. Maybe some television deals with it, but the angle in this movie would be we don't say what race or if any that the characters belong to, right? Um, some shots are shown with them talking with where we don't hear the dialogue, right? There's like a montage,
Mm-hmm.
shots of them inside a restaurant talking, music. Then we pop into certain parts of the conversation. So in the real world, they may have discussed that, but we don't get to hear it. So I don't want us to hear everything they talk about, just certain things, so that certain storylines, certain topics would make sense to us. So one of the ideas about race that they're going to discuss is that it's the categorizational system that came out of colonialism and races and slavery, but people take it as a real, natural, eternal, thing that exists in the world, where it's really just like, someone getting ideas about people in Mexico, saying Mexicans are X, Y, and Z, right? But when you actually meet Mexicans or go to Mexico and you get a proper understanding, Mexicans are just like every other people, right? There's some differences, but largely the same. So one of the ideas that I support, and also that the characters will discuss, is that the idea of races is popular with the current society because it comes from colonialism and slavery, and we're still historically tied to those two events. So in the future, this may not be an issue, and in the past, prior to colonialism and slavery, the American racial problem didn't exist in the other parts of the world. They had their own other social stratas and other problems. So a lot of people currently in America take race to be a fixed thing, eternal, and an actual part of the world, whereas in actuality it's just a temporary political problem. So that's the perspective that I come from on that. So that will be talked, and another main subject will be money and art making. How do filmmakers survive? So, some of the things that we talked about in the past. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention, you had sent me a link. I think it was through Twitter to a blog post you wrote last year.
Oh yeah,
late last year. How to make time for artwork and stay motivated.
Yeah.
Which was a really kind of lovely piece, and I'm going to link to it in the video description, because I think everyone should read it, especially creative people. I think
one person has read it. Good job, thanks.
More people will read it because I'm recommending it. But yeah, I think approach it mostly from a filmmaking standpoint, but you say it does apply to the artistic impulse in general, and you outline. I think it's like 12 points about like when to, or 11 points about when to stop making art and when to keep making art, and trying to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. So I just want to pull over for a second and say I really did
Awesome.
appreciate that piece, because it
What
does
did you like
speak to what
about it?
I well, and as if you've seen, in the last couple of weeks, I've been doing the Inktober challenge, where I do
Oh,
an ink
great
drawing every day.
drawing, high quality. You could definitely pro level. You could definitely have a second career in that.
Well, that was my first career, and I kind of put that away for the better part of a decade. I do, infrequent drawings every now and then, but I've been really getting back into this, and part of it was that I just lost the fire, the drive for it, and that's
Yeah.
where I kind of stumbled into film criticism 10 years ago.
Let me interrupt you for a second. This is something I think about all the time, just historically also. Uh, did you lose the fire in part because you had to make money to support your family, or because you were not getting ahead in that field as you thought you should?
Neither. Um, my day job, and this is more true back then when the switch went off than it is today. I was supporting my family through my art. It was a
Oh,
corporate
good,
job.
good.
I had a job as a corporate artist, and I still do, although I'm a producer now.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of it was literally a switch that went off. I'd come up to a precipice where I was on the verge of becoming potentially very successful with what I was doing, because
Awesome.
I got really big into political cartooning back during the 2008 election, and I actually had two pieces that won two separate contests that were run by Shepard Fairey, who did the Obey campaign.
Oh yeah.
One of which was put on display in I think it was the National Mall or something during the inauguration in 2009. It was
The big deal.
an art piece on universal health care,
Awesome.
and it was right after I won a place in that contest that I almost literally woke up one morning and I had no desire to do art anymore.
Wow.
And it wasn't like, I'm not going to do this. It was like the well had completely run dry, and I
Mm.
had this weird panic, because this is in January of 2009.
Yeah.
In August, so I was stumbling around in the dark for about 8 months, is when I picked up like film criticism, and I started the website.
Oh good.
Um, and so now like I said, the last decade I've been drawing things infrequently. Like each year I do an ink drawing portrait of my kids, and I do little Post-it notes for my son's lunchbox every day before he goes to school. But it wasn't until recently where I started doing these little spot ink drawings for like horror movies and the Inktober challenge that I'm like, I really used to enjoy this, and I think
Yeah.
I'm beginning to enjoy it again. So reading through that piece that you wrote about, figuring out why you're doing what you're doing, is it for fame, is it for money, does it make you happy, are you doing things during your regular life that don't make you happy? If so, stop doing those and do
Yeah.
things that make you happy. It's all very circular, and it's a great feeling to rediscover it.
Yeah, because film is so difficult, and that's a common conversation a lot of filmmakers have with themselves. And I've seen a lot of people be really into film, and then 2 years later, like completely out from it. And some people be really into film, they leave film, they hate it, they come back, then they leave film again, and then they come back. So I think also on the other end, I wonder how people who are millionaires making movies, uh, and how can they, when money making is no longer a challenge, I wonder what keeps them going. I mean, they must really love the artwork, or just the work, or the identity that comes from being filmmakers. I guess some people just probably quit after they get rich and famous. They probably
I,
go, "Oh, that's the end of that."
I wonder about that too, because a lot of it does, for me, come back to motivation. It's great to fantasize about, like, what if I didn't have to work a day job ever again? What if I just did have all the time in the world to just like watch movies or make drawings and that kind of stuff, do podcasts? And a lot of what I keep coming back to is this harsh reality about myself that I'm a procrastinator. and I also need the pressure, the wall, the deadline to run
Mm-hmm.
right up against.
Mm-hmm.
There have been weekends where like my wife and kids will be like out of town or something. I got the house to myself. I'm like, okay, leading up to that weekend, I've got all these plans. I'm gonna do this and this and this. I end up like sleeping in late and being depressed because I'm all alone and I don't have anything like driving me to do anything.
Right.
And from one point of view, it's like maybe that's my spirit or the universe telling me you need to slow down and just take some time to chill out. But it
Yeah.
doesn't feel good. It's not relaxing because I feel guilty that I'm not doing something.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, if I had all the money in the world, I think that'd be the worst thing for me because I'm like, well, now I don't have to strive for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you might be like that for a while. After that, when you become miserable from not doing anything that you think is productive or challenging, you might get back into it. That's probably rich filmmakers probably keep doing it just to have something interesting to do that they're good at, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, because I wonder about that too. I think about this stuff a lot, but this is the first time I'm really talking about it.
Good.
How much of how much of that, like getting back into it, is because they have a creative need versus they're rich, they possibly have a lifestyle they've become accustomed to, and if they're not being productive and not creating new sources of revenue, because like royalties only carry you so far,
Yeah.
unless you're like Kevin Feige and you're in control of the entire Marvel universe,
Yeah.
that you just have to go out and start working and doing the press stuff and all that just to keep your house or your second house.
Um, I think, I mean, this is all theoretical, but I think once you're a multimillionaire, the survive. I mean, depending on how. Let's assume you're a smart person who's not gambling away all the money, right? Let's
That's a
say
big assumption. Yeah.
yeah. Let's assume you have like 10 million in savings and revenue streams, investments, blah blah, built up. So I guess our basic question is, when money is no longer an option, not no longer issue, why would people keep making art? I would say the people who do it because it gives meaning to their lives, enriches their lives, makes their lives more interesting. And on the other end, when filmmakers make movies, and they're not making money from it, and it's just making money is a future possibility, but they're doing it anyway. Like experimental filmmakers, a lot of indie filmmakers, they do it because they're artists, that we're really into it, and we dig doing it, even if we lose money and time and blah blah blah. Uh, yeah. Yeah.
There's a podcast called The Movie Crypt, and
Mm-hmm.
there's two filmmakers. They're horror directors who started a podcast a few years ago, Adam Green and Joe Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I responded well to the blog post you wrote is because it touches on some stuff that they talked about. Adam Green in particular, people ask him, how do I become a horror movie director, and how do I, get the life that you have? And he says, well, if you can think of something that you're good at that you could do as a fallback career to making horror movies, you should go do that, because
Mm-hmm.
the life of a filmmaker
I agree.
is risky, and there's you have to be all in order to make things happen, and to make work that you're proud of. And so he talks a lot about that level of commitment. And I think about that a lot in terms of my own frustrations, because I do like doing art, but I just hadn't had that impulse. So I've been doing like podcasts and movie reviews, which is, it's like I have a creative drive that sometimes takes different forms. It
Yeah.
just has to get out somehow. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
drawing pictures, sometimes it's writing blog posts, sometimes it's doing a podcast.
Yeah. One thing about film is you have to be super ambitious on all levels of filmmaking, from no budget experimental filmmaking to Spielberg level filmmaking. A lot could go wrong. You could end up creating something you hate, or that you don't like, or everyone else hates. But unless you're super driven and super ambitious, you won't be able to adjust to the big challenges, psychological challenges that come your way. This is why I'm not worried about technology making it easier for people to make movies. There's still a sort of a mindset that's required to being a filmmaker that most people just don't have. I mean, they can develop it over time, but it's never going to come to a point where we have like 200 Tarantinos, you know, battling each other to get the funding. It's not going to come to that point. It's just
Right, because Tarantino is not just a style of filmmaking.
yeah,
It's a person. It's a guy who did his homework in the video store for a decade and then busted his ass to go out and get Harvey Keitel to be in his movie and then, and then prove himself and then just like grind it out over the course of decades. And there's a dedication barrier. Yeah, you're right. The technology is getting easier and easier, but unless you've got people who are willing to really put in the time with that technology and develop those relationships and have great ideas and put those out there.
The internal requirements. So if you dedicate yourself life as an artist to making movies, yeah, then over time you'll stumble on some great things. Or not even Tarantino, even you can look at Godard. There's not going to be like 40, 50 Godards because, Godard is still making movies. He's made like over 100 pieces from movies to TV shows to experimental video essays. So he's like, he could have quit a long time ago, right? He's got money. I assume he's got some money. He lives in Europe. His place in history is sealed in film history. But no, he's out making. He's like 300 years old now, and he's out making movies every day or every year. So there's a deep drive that artists have to create, and then because of that, they discover things that other people won't discover. Then they end up making more and more movies. Are you into experimental films? Have you seen a lot of them?
That's kind of like the slow cinema question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say no. I haven't seen a lot of experimental films, but
right.
You could probably name some pieces or filmmakers. Like, oh yes, I totally am. But off the top of my head, I can't. Nothing's coming to mind.
Okay, well, a lot of mainstream movies use experimental things that are discovered through experimental filmmakers and avant-garde filmmakers, like Ad Astra. The director James Gray, right? That's his name.
Yeah.
He consulted with scholars who are experts on experimental filmmaking for about 6 months, according to the scholars, and looked at lots of experimental films to come up with the idea to figure out how to portray space travel, and some of the scenes that he has to create. But about direct experimental films, I've been really getting into it lately because New York Film Festival has a sidebar called Projections. They've been doing it for 6 years, and they select a handful of experimental films and they show it. TIFF, Toronto International Film Fest, they have Wavelengths. So those two are two good areas to look at for. Those two sites are two good areas to look at. I post their links up on my Twitter all the time. But from a filmmaking perspective, experimental films could be done with a crew of one on a no budget. So if someone wants to get started on filmmaking and they don't have the money, they don't have the skills to rope people into, working on their crazy projects, that's a great place to start. So I always like experimental films and avant-garde films for that purpose. Jonas Mekas, whose movies you may have seen or you've heard about, he's a famous experimental / avant-garde filmmaker. His movies are mostly very poetic documentaries. Jem Cohen also, he did the documentary on Fugazi called Instrument. You may have seen that. Anyway, interesting field, something for you to look into.
Well, that's the thing, is even if it is just a crew of one with, a camera or an iPhone, the key is to just get started, right?
Yeah.
It's not like I'd like to be a filmmaker someday, or how do I become a filmmaker? It's like, well, you stop asking the question and film something, yeah. And you'll figure it out.
That's why I love experimental cinema and avant-garde cinema. That even if you have no money, but you have the desire to be a filmmaker, get started. Right? Go start filming your friends. There you go. Other topic, those are the four main topics, but some minor topics in the discussions are funny stories, positive ideas about people, mythology. The Kendros character will be really into mythology, whereas Rene is the guy's name. he's going to be like super upbeat all the time. So
So wait, upbeat people can't be into mythology? What's
no,
that?
no, no, no. That's just I had to assign qualities to the two characters. So
Okay.
he's not that much into mythology, but he thinks that a lot of things are awesome. So so and Kendra's character is more low key. It started the other way, but now like and then the last topic is society, history, religion. So another reason I've been reviewing experimental films is the slow romance will be comedy slash romantic comedy slash experimental slash avant-garde because I like to show scenes of the city. So the structure of the movie where it's 9 different dates gives me space in between each date to show shots of the city at length, so that'll work out. So I hope to submit it to projections, New York Film Festival next year, and obviously it's a long shot. I mean, they only select like 5 features. I think they showed like 5 features this year, but I'm going to submit to other experimental film festivals, also just regular comedy film festivals.
So what's so projections? Do you know what their submissions, like their intake is? Like if they select 5 films to screen, how many submissions do they get? Do you know what your competition
Probably
looks like?
a lot. Probably a lot, because New York Film Festival doesn't even they don't let you submit to the other categories. They just select. They have a selection committee that selects the other movies, drama, comedy, all that stuff. Short films and experimental films that you can submit to them.
Okay.
So one of the top places in the world to show off your experimental or avant-garde movie. So I don't know what the likelihood of getting in are. Probably low, but it's a good goal to have. But uh, so, the scene is if you're getting programmed at other festivals, chance of getting into one of these big festivals goes up higher. So you could submit to lower tier festivals, and I've seen Kevin Jerome Everson's movies being shown lots of different places than the big festivals have picked up historically in the past. So yeah, festivals kind of work off of other festivals. So yeah, you can get into smaller festivals, then eventually you may get into the larger festivals.
All right. So you're aiming for that for next year. One thing that struck me was you're talking about these interstitials of the city.
Yeah.
It sounds not dissimilar to the technique you used in Werewolf Ninja Philosopher.
Yeah.
Which takes place in the same kind of universe. Are you thinking about doing the kind of the same instrumental overlays with the shots of the city? Or are you going to like use dialogue, or what are you thinking about doing?
Right now the idea is to use shots of the city with music, shots of the characters walking around in the cities with music, and the dialogue scenes will just be when they're sitting down having coffee or having dinner or hanging out at someone's house. So yeah, the city will get, just like in Werewolf, will get a lot of screen time. That's why I'm thinking it's going to be more of a hybrid movie, comedy, romantic comedy, but also experimental films. You can show a city, like the entire movie could be shots of the city. So and a lot of my features that have popped up just the way I guess I prefer to do things. So now with this movie, there's a good excuse because it's in between days. We want to create some sort of a space between one date and the next date.
Right.
So everything's coming together. Hopefully at the end of this week we'll figure out who's going to play the male lead. Hopefully it'll be Amir Mott, LA-based filmmaker. And Kendra's ready to go. Script is almost done. We have the gear. I've been looking at some locations. So we're going to start filming later this month. Hopefully the next time we talk in early November, I'll have at least some good B-roll of the city that shows the city in an awesome way. And we hopefully in November we'll be done. The entire movie will be shot and edited.
Wow.
Then the film festival submissions begin. Oh, another thing about experimental films is Andy Warhol made 600 plus movies in 5 years. And Jonas Mekas has shot every day for like 50 years, literally every day for 50 years. And when he died, he had maybe finished 40 features. Kevin Jerome Everson has done 100 movies, maybe 12 features or so, something like that. One of the interesting things about experimental and avant-garde filmmakers is some of them are super productive to a level that you just can't do with Hollywood or indie filmmaking.
Well, I guess my question, let's use Warhol as an example, 600 movies in 5 years.
Yeah.
Are those complete movies? Like, when I think of a movie, I think of something that has not even necessarily a beginning, middle, and end, but it's like something you can show to someone. Like maybe there's a credit sequence at the beginning or the end. Because otherwise it's just like, I could say I shot 50 movies last week because I took out my iPhone when I was getting on the train or going to the John or something. Those aren't movies. They're just kind of incidental. I don't even know how you categorize them. Maybe they are movies. I don't know.
Well, that's the interesting conversation in the world of experimental films and avant-garde films. The Whitney Museum is categorizing the 600 works as films. So,
but is that because is that because it's Warhol, or is it like, do they have some criteria that they're basing that on?
Same criteria is applied to even new experimental filmmakers. Like Kevin Jerome Everson shoots the moon, right? the moon going in and out of eclipse. That's considered a complete film. He shoots people at work, no plot, just showing them working. Like his movie Tonsler Park is about shot in black and white 60 millimeter, about people working the polls during the Obama election, the 2008, during the Trump election, recently, 2016. So yeah, in the world of experimental and avant-garde cinema, you don't have to have a beginning, middle, and end. You don't have to have credits. You don't have to even have human shapes. It could be just light. It could be like showing how light changes over time over a certain city, something like that. So so for someone who wants to make art on a regular basis in film, that is a very good way to go. Because one of the problems that a lot of people find with filmmaking is it's tough to practice on the Hollywood level or the Indiewood level, because it takes years to get the money together to make one of those movies.
Right.
But if you define yourself as an experimental filmmaker and you shoot 50 scenes on one weekend on your phone, let's say you do that for 5 years, you may end up with something super interesting.
Yeah.
So Warhol is a celebrity, obviously, for other reasons. So yeah, some of those movies are just documents of people just doing stuff or people not doing stuff. They're not movies with a start, with a start, middle, and an end, and titles. That's what most people think of as movies, but that's because we've been trained through Hollywood to expect that.
And this may be a deeper discussion for another time, but it's something I kind of struggle with. I'm a big fan of Warhol, but I'm not necessarily a fan of what he wrought. And I don't know if I can even put this at his feet, because I've seen a lot of other artists like Jackson Pollock, who is someone that I admire, but it's almost like they started something, or they're at the forefront of movements that allowed a lot of other people to come by and say, oh, I can splash paint on a canvas and hang it up and sell it for $5,000, and it's a legitimate piece of artwork.
Yeah.
How much of that is intention versus technique versus there is no intention or technique? It's literally just splashing. I think I went to the Chicago Art Institute, and this was more than a decade ago, and I went into their modern art section.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to get this wrong, but there's like a big black canvas with white lettering on it. It said 1984. And I was like, oh, this must be the 1984 exhibit, or this is the year that all this artwork was done. And I looked, and it had a title card, and it's like number 7 in a series of date paintings. I'm like, this is just like screen printing the year. What is this?
Yeah.
And how do I
Well,
get in on this action?
yeah. Well, modern art is like that. I mean, there's a whole, ongoing debate as to if certain things are art. But let's say you had a ton of money and you don't really believe in movies. You don't think movies are art, and you think anyone could do it. And let's say you're super talented, and you fake something like Goodfellas, right? I mean, you do it, but you don't believe in what you're doing. But your movie turns out to be a pretty good mobster movie like Goodfellas, right? But you did it to prove that it's not hard to do, right? That it's easy. But let's say someone looks at the two end products, not knowing the stories and why the second person did it. Is the second piece still art slash entertainment? I mean, let's just say art because entertainment is something else. I think that's in modern art. That's the thing. If you have the intention and other people recognize it as art, then it's probably art.
I I understand
No,
where you're
no
coming
matter
from.
how easy, no matter how easy it is to do.
Well, I don't think that you can make Goodfellas without intent and heart behind it.
What if you
Um,
did it? What if you did it just to show, just to say, Goodfellas is such an easy thing to do. I'm gonna do it just to show you that
but but
anyone could do it.
but Goodfellas is not easy to do. I mean,
True, true.
what I'm
Yeah,
talking about is almost like comparing Goodfellas to me taking out, like, going upstairs, borrowing my wife's phone,
yeah,
bringing it down here, turning on the video camera, and
yeah,
filming me recording us on
yeah.
Skype and saying, "Here's a film."
Oh yeah, people have done that. People have
Yeah, and
done
I
that.
get that, and I'm just like that. That kind of tears my brain apart when I think about it,
Yeah,
because I've been an artist all my life, and I've been trained, and I work at it, and I'm very dedicated, and you can never really get inside someone, but there's just something that kind of rankles me when I see someone passing. I'm going to use the phrase passing off. It's
yeah,
probably
yeah,
too
yeah,
dismissive, but
yeah.
passing off like, oh, I shot water running in my faucet for
Right,
30 seconds. What do you think
right.
of my film? I'm like, I could do that on accident.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think as a thing that exists in society, you would have to have people who agree with you that a certain thing is some kind of an artwork. And if you can get to that level, yeah, that alone is an accomplishment, right? The guy who did the 1984 paintings. I mean, yeah, it's easy to do, but he's the only one. He's one of the few people who are in that exhibit, right? There
Yeah.
there are like just like the 50 Tarantino's example. There aren't like 50 Andy Warhols. I mean, there's people who are kind of similar, but you know what I
And,
mean?
right. And
Maybe part of the talent in being that kind of an artist is convincing society what you're doing is art.
yeah, and I think it might have been that same day, or at least it was in that same era, that, like, it was another exhibit in the Art Institute, like down the hall or on a different floor, where they had a Chuck Close exhibit, where there's
Right.
like these 50-foot tall paintings that are all made out of like micro canvases, and you
Yeah.
step back and it's a photorealistic picture. I'm like, yeah, okay, date painting guy, what do you think of this?
That's right. Or classical art like Michelangelo or even Edward Hopper, Uh,
Right.
yeah, but it's still yeah, yeah. Luckily, I'm not drawn to creating super abstract experimental films. My movies will be comedies, so there's a limit as to how abstract that can get. People still need to be able to understand what you're talking about for comedies to work. So there's a limit as to Uh, but if I was if I was pulled towards making, shooting half an hour of water running, that might be interesting. I mean, I know it's tough to market something like that, but there are experimental filmmakers who do exactly stuff like that.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, this has been a wonderfully wide-ranging conversation. I feel like we're getting into a groove here. I can't wait to see what we talk about next month
As
after the
usual.
after the
Hopefully
movie's
before the
done.
next,
Yeah.
yeah, as usual. Hopefully before the next podcast interview, you'll be able to see at least some B-roll that is close to final, and then by end of November, film will be done, and then I hope to work on Werewolf 2 after that.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, yeah, I'm definitely gonna get the update and send me stuff as you're able to, and we'll
Will
talk
do.
about it, man. Cool.
Excellent. All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks again, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. See ya.
All right, bye.